Hey guys, welcome to Yesterday's Coffee, the podcast where we chat about fitness, nutrition, and business all over coffee that may or may not have been brewed yesterday. Today we are covering the topic of keeping a food log. So this is high as far as importance for a lot of what we do with most people that we work with. And I feel like it's also something that we get a lot of pushback on.
People do not like doing this.
No.
And I would say that this is one of the biggest things that deters people. So when I build a plan for somebody, like it comes down to the food log on whether or not they're going to follow it. Like that's like the deal breaker for them.
Yeah.
Which I understand in some respects, and I don't think food logs are appropriate for every single client, for every single person. They can make a lot of people feel way more stressed or paranoid or whatever, and that's never the goal. However, I think that you do at some point in your life need to come face to face with what you're eating on a daily basis, just for your own personal education. Like you need to know what it looks like, what a typical day of eating looks like for you.
Right.
Because more often than not, people don't even remember what they eat throughout the day. And if you aren't even being aware enough to be able to recall what your day looks like, then chances are the diet is not serving you.
Yeah. Now that was going to be my first question is, so what's the purpose? Why do we log our food? And you kind of already touched on that a little bit. And really it comes down to if you have especially a body composition goal and you're trying to lose weight or you're trying to build muscle and you don't know what you're consuming, you have no idea what's going on. Like until,
well, you just have no idea. Like it's even more than an energy balance or a macronutrient type thing. It's honestly, most people go out throughout their day and eat just whatever's convenient, whatever's easy, whatever sounds good. And we're never held accountable to actually putting into our body what our body needs. And I think that's the most important part. So obviously, if we have a weight-related goal or a body-related goal, we need to have better control over what's coming in. But I think it's just important for people to know.
Right, absolutely. I think it's really interesting too, because one of the first things that I talk to people about when I'm first meeting with them or in a consult and we're discussing their goals, one of the first things that I ask is to take me through what a typical day looks like for them meal-wise. And
it's really hard for people.
Well, it's funny because the idea that people have in their head as to what a typical day looks like is often quite different than what they're really doing. And so what I mean by that is a lot of times they'll walk me through a couple different meals, and breakfast will be either they don't have it at all or it's something super simple, like maybe it's a piece of fruit or maybe they make a smoothie or a shake or something. And then lunch is like some sort of protein source and maybe a vegetable, and then same thing for dinner. Chicken and a vegetable is like the quote-unquote dinner I get 90% of the time. And then my favorite follow-up to that is, so what'd you eat yesterday? And I don't think I've ever once heard the exact same thing repeated to me.
Well, it's because more often than not, when you ask, I mean, people always want their food recall to sound better than it really is.
Right.
So what people usually do is they'll give you their best day.
Yeah.
They'll say, if I'm on track, this is what I would eat.
Yeah, something I did once 3 months ago.
Yeah, but how often are you realistically on track? Or how often are you eating what you consider to be your ideal day? That's what people recall to me. They'll choose what they think is the healthiest, and they basically want to see if they're on the right track or not.
Oh, yeah.
But more often than not, if you were actually eating what you're recalling to me, you'd probably be a lot closer to your goal than you are.
And this doesn't even go into the difference between the weekday and the weekend.
And I always ask. Yeah. I honestly always ask.
I do too. Yeah. Because
like, what's your weekday look like? What's the weekend look like?
Right. Because more often than not, even if you're doing the weekday pretty well, if everything just goes to hell on the weekend, you can just wipe that out right away. So back to what's the purpose of logging your food? You need to have a basic understanding of what you're doing day to day and what you're doing consistently, because one day, bad or good, is not going to affect anything.
No, your body gets set in patterns and schedules, and it likes that.
Mm-hmm.
Your body has a really great memory for those types of things, and your body is really going to respond to things that are done consistently.
Absolutely.
So even 2 or 3 good days or bad days isn't really enough to set you one way or the other.
Right.
It's the constant, consistent day to day. And I would say 7 consistent days in a row is probably where things might start to change.
Yeah. Yeah. If you hit a plan that's designed properly for what you need 7 days in a row, then you'll definitely see some sort of movement in one direction on the scale. And so part of why it's so important to be accountable to what you're consuming is a lot of people just don't even know what foods are and what they're made up of. So when we try to build these plans out and we're focused on calories and macronutrients and how all of these fit together into a cohesive plan, a lot of people don't even know what the difference between a fat and a carb is.
Yeah.
And I've seen that a number of times where people think something like cream that they're putting in their coffee is a carb.
Or butter.
Or butter a carb. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And that really comes down to just basic education on what these foods even are. Because if you don't even know the difference of what the foods are to begin with, then how on earth are you going to navigate this type of nutrition goal without even writing down what you're consuming?
Yeah. Well, and I think problem number 1 with that is that most people are so concerned with calories that they have never cared about this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They've never needed to know what a protein, a fat, or a carb is.
Right.
Because everything in our diet culture has always taught us to look at energy balance only and only the calories. And we know that calories are a really big part of that equation, but we also know that the breakdown of the macronutrients is what makes the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're not the only part.
Exactly.
So, yeah, understanding what everything is and figuring out what you're typically doing through the day is you got to have
that educational base. Yeah.
You have to have a reference point because anytime you try to make a change, like we were saying earlier, it's got to be a consistent change that you're running through for at least a week at a time to see any sort of difference. So if you don't know what you're starting with, how do you know what any sort of change is going to be?
Exactly. Well, and I think even aside from following a set plan and logging your foods according to a plan, I think that it's even just beneficial to log the things that you do on a daily basis, just so you know what's coming into your body.
Mm-hmm.
Like once you understand, and you guys, we went through the energy balance in one of our podcasts and we went through macros in one of our podcasts. And so now that you have kind of a basic understanding of what those pieces mean, going through and logging just a couple days of what you normally eat will be helpful in seeing where you fall and kind of give you a place to start in knowing what to change for the future or knowing what kind of plan is going to work for you.
Right. One of the first things that I do with somebody I begin working with is try to take, if they haven't already been logging their food and keeping track of their macros, which 9 times out of 10 they're not, is I try to take what they're telling me as best I can based on whatever they can recall, and I try to map out what those macros are so that I have a reference point. So I'm not just pulling these numbers out of nowhere, because even people that are similar size can have so many different things going on, metabolic rate wise, exercise wise, hormone wise, that having that reference point from stuff that they're doing prior to meeting with me is really useful in me being able to help them move forward much more quickly.
Well, sure, because you have to build a plan that's tailored as closely as possible to someone's normal routine in order for them to be successful. You can't expect somebody to make 10 changes all at once. So we can build your diet. If you're somebody who, in your recall, you list a lot of carb foods, I'm not going to automatically put you on like the lowest carb diet possible, because that's not something you're going to be successful with. So that diet recall, like Kyle was saying, gives us a solid foundation, and a good coach can kind of extrapolate that and kind of make some educated guesses on what your like the summary of your week or your life kind of looks like altogether, and move from there.
Absolutely. And so I think one of the biggest reasons we get pushback with keeping a food log is everyone's favorite excuse is, oh, I don't want to spend that much time taking care of this.
It can be time consuming, but usually only at the beginning. If you can log your foods for a week, or if you get set on a plan from a coach, we're not giving you 12 unique meals to log in a week. We're giving you 4 to 5.
Well, and that leads into a couple different things. So whenever someone is just beginning trying to account for their foods and maybe begin following a plan, I always recommend keeping foods as simple as possible. Now, that's not to say that you can't do these more complex recipes and try to fit all this stuff together, but part of logging your food is obviously keeping track of every single thing that you're consuming.
Yes.
So if you're keeping your meals a lot simpler, and maybe it's a protein source and a vegetable and rice like people claim it is,
right.
then it's very easy to account for what those things are. You got 3 different things in your meal. You list the macros for each thing. You can tabulate how that works. If you're wanting to do a recipe, that's totally fine, but just understand every single ingredient is going to have its own macro profile.
Sure.
And so you've got to account for that. And then if you're making something that is servings in bulk, you've got to be able to divvy up those servings relative to the macros of the dish overall and be able to divide that down to however much you're actually consuming at a given time.
Well, and a lot of the food tracking, applications and websites will have some sort of recipe calculator. So that in itself isn't really as difficult as some people think that it is. But at the same time, you're still going to have to go through the work of plugging in that recipe.
Right.
So when it comes down to how much time you're spending in your food log, it's coming down to what choices you're making
what
on
you're eating.
What those meals are. So if you don't want to do so much logging, simplify your recipes.
And eat similar things.
If
you eat the same thing for a full day and repeat that, or not necessarily the same thing at each meal, but say you have 3 different meals through the day and you repeat that each day, maybe it took you 5 minutes to log it the first time, and then the next
you can just copy and paste it.
Copy and paste. There's
most
no
of those
there.
food logs will just have a feature where you can just pull meals from the previous day into the current day.
Right.
And then it takes you 30 seconds to a minute. But also, what eating the same thing day to day does for you. It's also consistency. Right? So that just feeds into your goals even more, making you more successful overall.
Yeah.
But definitely time can be a huge issue. Learning how to navigate the different apps can be time consuming, but once you get over that initial hump, so maybe it takes you 20 minutes to figure out the app at first, and then it should only take you like 5 minutes max at a time.
Yeah, that's what you've got to make a trade-off here. So if you're somebody that the biggest concern is the amount of time that you're spending logging your food, well, then eat similar meals, because that's going to shorten the amount of time that you're logging drastically. If, however, you're getting bored of these foods, then switch it up by all means, but you've still got to take the time to log that. So this is not something that you've got to do something. It's not just going to be done for you.
You have to make some sort of compromise here. So, if you're somebody who needs structure and you need to have kind of all these things laid out for you to see and measure your day against to make sure you're hitting your goals, then you have to record your food. And if you record your food, then you know that it's going to be a little bit time consuming.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me into these apps in general. So one of the biggest ones is MyFitnessPal. And these are great applications. They're very useful for logging stuff, keeping track of stuff very quickly, very easily. But I caution you against just trusting the values that they give you. So a lot of times the foods that are stored in the banks of MyFitnessPal, for example, are not necessarily correct, or they correspond to something different than what you have. So especially if you're looking at like a recipe that's not coming from any sort of specific type of food, and you just look up fried chicken, or you just look up like spaghetti and meatballs, like that, you have to be
very, very specific.
So what I really recommend when you're using that is, instead of trying to find these foods from their library, I recommend putting in your own.
Definitely putting in your own, or they do have the feature, if you're using anything that comes in a package, use the barcode scanning feature.
QR code or whatever.
So MyFitnessPal definitely does it. And I know that there are a couple other apps that do it too, but those are going to be the most accurate values in the database. So like Kyle was saying, the database is constructed from just normal people.
Yeah, it's
normal
users.
people plug it in, and there's really no approval process. So somebody can put chicken breast in and say that it has, all these carbs or all this fat and no protein, and it just gets put in the library. And so if you happen to find it and you log it, your values are going to be completely off for the whole day.
And we see it. Like
I see it all the time.
We look at our client logs and they're like, what are these numbers?
A lot of them are just like have zero values.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people will log things that are just completely zeroed out and they didn't notice. And so they end up eating more to fill those calories and macros. And then I go in and I'm like, well, you thought you were under, but actually you're way over and I'm sorry. But learning how to navigate the app before you go into the process, I think, is important.
And paying attention to your serving sizes.
Paying attention to the serving sizes, paying attention. I mean, if you're logging something like chicken breast and you've already built this, foundation of knowledge, you know that chicken breast is a protein food. You know that it has protein, very little fat, no carbs.
Right.
Look at the nutrition facts before you hit accept. So before you decide to put it into your log, make sure that it roughly matches the idea of what you think it should look like. You don't have to know them exactly, but just be aware and pay attention. Yeah,
and you can Google these foods too. Like
you can.
Most basic foods, you can actually pull up that info off the internet very easily and use that to cross-reference if you are looking up pre-input values in the MyFitnessPal library. Because that's what we do. Like if there's a food that we don't know off the top of our head, we're using Google.
Yeah.
So that's just something to be aware of. MyFitnessPal and their pre-stored values are not necessarily correct, and they can be wildly wrong.
Yes.
But
I don't want that to deter anybody from using that,
right?
Because it is still a really valuable tool and a valuable resource. Just again, you have to use it as a learning tool.
Just check. That's all.
And double check. Yeah. Don't just look up all these different foods and just hit accept. You have to pay attention because that's the whole point of this anyways, for you to learn more.
Right.
And if you're not even paying attention to what those values look like, you're not really gaining anything from that.
Yeah. So best practice.
So be careful.
Record your own foods. Save your own foods. And that way you really know what you're doing. And you can make meaningful adjustments to those macros.
Definitely. Well, and the other thing too is be super specific. So, don't just type in chicken breast. If you know that you bought a Purdue chicken breast, type in Purdue chicken breast.
Absolutely.
So try to be as specific as possible. And even some of those whole foods will have barcodes associated that you might be able to scan. So even a package of chicken breast has a barcode that you can scan and it will populate that information for you.
Right.
So again, use the barcode feature whenever you can, but otherwise just be super specific.
Definitely. And so this kind of takes us to our final point for the day is, do you always have to keep a food log to stay in shape?
No, absolutely not. The food log is just a tool to use for your own personal knowledge. So the ultimate goal would be for you to be able to eat a little bit more, well, not even a little, a lot more intuitively.
Right.
So for you to recognize visually what serving sizes look like and what measurements of your different, nutrient-based foods look like, and be able to build meals more intuitively because you've already built that knowledge base.
Right.
But you cannot eat intuitively if you don't know anything about
That's
food.
100% right. So Alexa and I do not keep food logs.
No.
It's very much intuitive eating based on what we've already come to know. Now, that's not to say that I've never kept a food log. I certainly have.
Honestly, I check in every couple months and I'll log for a week or so just to see kind of where I'm at, especially if I change my normal meals.
A reference point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and because we've been doing this for years and years and years, and we know what these foods are composed of, we know what our basic nutrient guidelines are, we can very easily come up with these values off the top of our heads. It's not something we have to really think through. The reason keeping track of all this is so important is so that you understand what these foods are, what's in them, and how they fit together. Ultimately, we want you to get to the point where it's second nature. Chicken breast is a protein source. You know that you're eating peanut butter, not as a protein source, but more as a fat source. And you understand what these types of foods balance out one another as, so that you understand where that they fit.
Yeah.
And when you get that, it's very simple. You don't have to log every single macro, every single calorie. Now, if I really wanted to get in crazy shape, I would definitely start getting more precise with it.
It all depends very much on your goals, for sure. So if you do have more of a weight-related goal, you would probably want to be logging more consistently or, for a longer period of time than the average person who was just kind of focused on learning a little bit more and being healthy.
Right.
But I think that, it's important to note that I'm not saying I want everyone to know the exact calories and the macronutrient profile of every single meal they eat forever.
Right.
That's not the point. It's just understanding what's in the food you're eating and how it's going to best serve your body and how it's going to make you feel at the end of the day. And
you have to earn that. You have to get to the point where you understand that. This is not going to be a process.
I hate the word earn, but
it's true. You're not going to understand. You're not going to learn how to do this and eat intuitively for logging your food for 2 weeks.
Well, yeah. You can't. Intuition doesn't exist without some sort of foundation. So It's building that foundation first. And maybe that foundation really isn't related to specific gram amounts or specific calorie amounts. Maybe that intuition is honestly knowing what a protein food looks like or a carb food looks like and understanding
portion size.
Yeah, exactly. What amounts are going to make you feel good and what amounts are going to serve your body.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to take it down to the macro level every single time. If you have a basic understanding of what your overall macro needs are, and then you map out a day and see what relative portion sizes look like to achieve that based on a certain amount of meals through the day, then you can very intuitively say, okay, I need X amount of protein at this meal, vegetables, carbs, fat sources, whatever, and I know that I have this many meals through the day. That way you're not even counting all these numbers. You're just looking at meals from kind of a broad perspective and what each of those meals breaks down as.
Exactly, because you've built that.
Yeah.
You've built that foundation and you have that knowledge base. And like Kyle said, it's becoming second nature to you. I also wanted to point out how you can use MyFitnessPal or another food app as a tool to learning how to make other substitutions. So if you are following a plan and you're keeping things relatively simple, and then all of a sudden you're afraid to veer from that path, but you're starting to get a little bit bored, you can use kind of one of your previous days of, being on your normal plan, and you can make substitutions into that same day in order to find what foods are going to kind of be equal substitutions and are going to get you to those goals by the end.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I have a lot of my clients do when it comes to trying to add in variety and substituting different meals throughout the day, is because they're all nervous and like, is this going to work? How is this going to translate? Am I still going to hit my goals? Use a fully logged day as a template and then just plug things in and out.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how we do it.
Yeah.
Once you've kind of got that framework built, it's just a matter of finding what other options fit in there. There is no secret to different foods. There's no fat burning foods. There's no muscle building foods, really. I mean, beyond having a protein source.
Sure.
It's not the specific food itself that's causing this change. It's that energy balance overall. And so when you've got that framework, these types of meals, how they fit together and what you like, that's where you can be very flexible with your food choices, sub things in and out, and still hit those goals day after day.
Well, yeah, and in learning how to make those substitutions, again, you're building your knowledge base. So now you can feel comfortable eating meals wherever you are, if you're out or if you're at someone else's house, building your own meals at home. You're going to feel a lot more comfortable now that you've built that solid foundation.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great wrap up for logging food, why we want you to do it, why it's necessary in the beginning, but also realizing that this isn't something you have to do every day for the rest of your life.
We don't want you to. We don't want you to have to.
Yeah. But you need to learn the process first, and there's no shortcut with it. You need to learn it. You need to know how it works. And once you've got that, you can use that skill for the rest of your life. Well,
and as time consuming and as, tedious as this may seem to you, this is actually saving you a ton of time over having to read pages and pages and pages of articles and books on these topics. Because that's your only other option at that point to build that education.
Yeah.
So you either log your food for a couple of days or you go to school and get a nutrition degree.
That's an option too. But I think the the former is better. So thank you guys for watching this week. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have anything you'd like us to cover in the future, let us know. You can find me at hypertrofit.com. Alexa's at therootedrd.com. And until next week, we will see you guys again soon.
Yeah, we'll see you guys next week.
All right.